last two sessions on Deuteronomy. We did 3 on Genesis, 2 on Exodus, 1 on Leviticus, 2 on Numbers, and now 2 on Deuteronomy. By now, if you have been reading along in the Bible, you will notice that there are some laws that have repeated. And they maybe have come up in a little different form, but they have repeated. And that has caused lots of people lots of concern, a lot of wonder about why all this took place. And so I'll put my microphone on here, may as well do that too. And so a lot of wondering about why in the world do they repeat, and there are various suggestions about that. Some, is that enough to give? Okay, let's leave it at that. There are people who have different theories about how all of this actually comes together, that there is a core of it from Moses, and then there are aggregates that come to that later. I'm not going to get in that anymore, but that's what they call higher criticism, and it has been occasioned actually by the fact that there are some things that are just kind of puzzling. So, for example, we will see that there's a different motivation, and I'll look at it with you, for taking a day of rest in Exodus versus in Deuteronomy. So the motivation will be a different one. And so people who have looked very carefully, I mean, there are people who know practically every half verse, and they look at every single word. So the word for keeping the Sabbath day holy, the one is remember, the other is keep. And so you'll have little things like this. The strange thing is the book of Deuteronomy actually kind of is the prelude for Joshua and Judges and Samuel and Kings. So some of the same vocabulary that will be here about remember the Lord and do not forget him is going to be there in both of them. If you look at the sheets that are typed out, and I had to make a little bit of a change with a pen, the material for today, it says we are going to look at Deuteronomy 1 to 11 and 29 to 34. Because the actual material of the what we would call laws is in 12 through 26 plus 27 and 28 kind of come in there as well. And so we're going to look at the beginning part and the end part, and I hope that I will save myself enough time for Deuteronomy 32. I spent 7 years working on a doctoral thesis on that, and usually in class I would have roughly 20 seconds as I'm finishing the unit before time is up. They're going to take a test on it tomorrow, and so I never got to talk about that very much. But one of the things that has been a kind of a fly in the ointment for people who think that all of this is very late is the fact that it follows a pattern of making treaties that is actually quite early. Now, until you get into other ancient cultures, you wouldn't know any of this stuff. But you might know that there are creation stories that the Babylonians have. And there are flood stories that the Babylonians have. And many other kinds of things. I have a nice, big, thick, fat book by James Pritchard, who is just the editor of this, where it looks at all the various countries, whether it be the Sumerians or the Akkadians or the Babylonians or the Hittites or the Egyptians or even a little bit from the Moabites and some others, that this is reverberating too much for me. See if that maybe helps it. Can you still hear from that?
It doesn't sound like you're amplified anymore.
Huh?
I can hear you, but it doesn't sound like you're amplified.
Okay, I'd rather have it that way. And so, what they found, anybody know the word Hittite? There's actually 2 different groups called the Hittites, but the Hittites were from eastern Turkey. All right, they were a very major power in the ancient world, and sometimes they would make treaties. Some people have talked about this as parity treaties and suzerainty treaties are the 2 kinds of treaties. A parity treaty would be where 2 people are on a par. Okay, so they're the same and they're making an agreement. So for example, we might say that a marriage could be a parity arrangement. When Martin Luther got married, he and Katie had both been disowned by their parents because they became a monk and a nun, and thus they could not have property because you took a vow of poverty as well as chastity and obedience. And so when they got married, that was, as we would say, for love. Okay, they didn't bring anything to the relationship. But you could also marry for money, where you might marry somebody else where you have a more minor figure marrying a more major figure, and then there would be sort of obligations. That's where you probably would have something like a prenuptial agreement, where somebody would say, well, you know, if you leave this marriage, you don't get to take half of what you married into. And there was an early dating site that I was visually looking at last night on a Perry Mason episode. And this guy had a lot of money, but he tried to come in looking like he was very poor because he wanted to meet somebody that he could marry. And so he was touting how much she had. She had a farm and all this kind of stuff. The truth was, the husband of the company that was arranging this, the lady was the one who was trying to get the guy's money. She knew about it and he didn't know that she knew. So she was the one trying to rip him off. And thus, you know, I want money, how can I get that money? And it was, you know, a typical Perry Mason episode. The person who is in trouble is always the innocent one who comes on the scene afterwards and touches the weapon in the body and, you know, has all the blood and everything and all those kind of things. He is a nice diversion for me, so I still enjoy watching him. But anyway, so a suzerainty treaty, the other word for that would be a vassal treaty. So suzerain was the big cheese. It must be a French word, I don't know. The suzerain is kind of a big guy. So a feudal lord who has a lot of people under him. And the way that would work is, even in the Middle Ages, in a book I'm reading by Karl Volz about the age from the end of the Roman Empire till the beginning of the Reformation, he talks about this, that in a feudal society where you've got people who might have their own farm but might not be very well protected, and so some bigger cheese comes along and says, okay, you make a treaty with me, which is common in the ancient Near East as well, and if anybody attacks you, I'll come and help you with all the other boys in the band from the other farms all around. But if somebody else gets attacked, then you come and you help me. And the way this was put together is, first of all, you would have a historical prologue, or preamble, I should say. So a preamble would be like what we have in the preamble of our Constitution. Amble means to walk around, okay? So preamble is before you start walking through these details, we're going to give you a little something. So let me read you the preamble in Deuteronomy. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness, on the plain opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban or Laban, Hazarot, and Dizahav. By the way of Mount Seir, it takes 11 days to reach Kadesh Barnea from Horeb. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites just as the Lord had commanded him to speak to them. This was after he had defeated King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this law as follows. That's the preamble. Okay? It just says, here's the setting. Here's the scene in which this took place. We don't know anything at all about what he's going to say yet. Then the next major part of this, and these are all part of the treaty patterns in the second millennium, which is why this is how people have looked at it. After you have the preamble, and a king might say, I'm a great and wonderful, glorious king, and I'm standing here before all of you people now. And then he's going to get into what went on. So, the next part is going to be called the historical prologue. It's going to say, here's how things have gone up to this point. So for example, when I was at Concordia, and I had been interim pastor at Emmaus for 4 years, somebody, and I've never heard who and never want to know who, somebody nominated me to be the pastor at Emmaus. Okay? I liked teaching at Concordia. And I liked pastoring at Emmaus. But I said, I still have some years to teach, and it's okay if you don't consider me any further, you know, to the people who are in the committee. And then I went down to the Synod Convention down in Houston, and I saw a guy named Charles Schultz, who teaches at Concordia in Ann Arbor. And Charles was speaking from the floor of the convention and sitting with all of the delegates. Now, one thing that you might know is teachers don't get to be delegates to district or synod conventions. So Charles and I are the only two who were ever ordained at Divine Shepherd in Ann Arbor. So just the two of us. And I'd seen him at meetings before. I went up to him, I saw him in the buffet line. I said, Charles, how are you doing this? And he said, well, I am the half-time pastor, I think 21 hours a week, at St. Thomas out in the country in Ann Arbor. And that's my call, and I'm on a rolling contract at Concordia Ann Arbor. Now, since that has changed, so he is not there anymore, the current president, who is also president of Concordia in Mequon, has said he doesn't want that going on. But it was going on. And he said, you know, the Board of Regents at Concordia Ann Arbor is allowing me to do both of those. So I don't know how it worked out for him. So I saw President Holtz and President Seitz at the Synod Convention. I said, what would you think if I kept doing, which is the arrangement was I was doing like 3/4 time at Emmaus and then full-time at Concordia. But if I teach intensive study course in Mark, well, then I do Bible class on Mark. So, you know, it's kind of like an odd form of a dual parish. And so I went back and I approached the congregation. I said, you know, would this be something that would work? You have to make your decision. And so I got interviewed. And one of the questions was, well, now, how would this work? And I made a very simple statement. It's been working for 4 years, worked just the same way. Nothing would change, except my call would now be at Emmaus. So that would be my historical prologue. So if I have a funeral to do, well, maybe I have the funeral at 1 o'clock instead of at 11 o'clock in the morning, if I have a class in the morning. And at Jehovah, when I was doing it there, I had 40 funerals in 4 years. They couldn't wait to get away from me. It was really sad. And it always worked out. Now, once in a while, Dawn Hurt, who was the parish administrator there, would come and pick me up in front of Luther's statue and zing me around. So I get out of class at 10 minutes to 11, and I'm starting the funeral at 5 after 11, or 10 minutes to 5 after, zip around, get my robes on, and go at it. But I simply said, okay, this is how it has worked, so nothing would be different for that. And so eventually the congregation decided to call me, though they had 3 other people they interviewed. If they said, we'll try him first. If the congregation says no, then we've got 3 other names, people that we've interviewed. And I have no idea what the percentage was, but I got called then to be Emmaus 3/4 time and Concordia full-time. And then when I retired from Concordia, then I became full-time at Emmaus. And Concordia wouldn't pay me anymore. I don't know why. Every time I asked Michael Dorner, why don't you keep paying me? I enjoy getting these checks. He said, that's fraud. I don't understand fraud any more than honking the horn. But anyway, so after you get the historical prologue, and we're going to look at that today, then you get stipulations. And we're going to look at two sets of stipulations. The first one is from chapters 5 to 11. We're going to look at that today. And then there are some very specific ones from 12 to 26. Then there are curses in both 27 and 28, blessings and curses. And then we're going to look at the last stuff from 29 to 34, if it works that we get that far today. That would be the stipulations, and then at the end, the blessings and curses. So you might remember, and so the question is always, which kind of a treaty do you have? But in the parity treaty, you'd have people kind of shake hands. Another one of the episodes of Perry Mason, this one guy from Saudi Arabia or some country in the Mideast gives a coin, and that's it, or a handshake would be all that you would need. If you remember back to Genesis chapter, let's see what it would be, chapter 15, is where God says to Abraham, cut the animals in part, and I'm going to go through in between them. May I die if I go back on the covenant? Okay, now you'd have to ask the question, is that a parity treaty or a suzerainty treaty? But God is acting almost like he is the underling, like the vassal. That he says, I'll keep my word and you can have my life. Otherwise, well, God can't swear by anybody greater than himself. But when that fiery pot goes through, he is saying, you can trust my words. I will keep my promise for you. And that really is the key all the way through the scriptures. That's one thing that Martin Luther picked up on that was really quite astounding, that God makes promises. And so in fact, Randy Sharon used to talk about, he was pastor at Berea in Richfield. I don't know if he ever said it to you guys, but you pray God's promises. And that's always been a very helpful thing for me. You don't pray your needs necessarily, you pray God's promises. And so if he doesn't plan to give you something, then you can be knocking at the door forever, and he might just say, well, that's not something that's part of the arrangement. But he says, I'm going to take you to be with me. I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And so for me, as I taught in early years, what kept coming out was, I am with you, I am with you, I will be with you. I always laugh when I see this thing about Moses, where God says to him by the burning bush, after you've delivered the people out of Egypt, I'll give a sign to you that you'll worship me on this mountain. And I would say, could I please have the sign beforehand? You know? But he got the snake in the water and the leprosy and all that, so he had some of those. But the treaties then were going to be something where you could rely on the other person. Now, what often happens is somebody changes sides. So if you want to understand, Kathy likes reading about the entire monarchy and all of the monarchy connections in Europe, where you've got some in Russia and some in England and some in France and some in Italy and some in Spain, you know, and they're all part of the same larger family. But sometimes I go with one cousin instead of another cousin because I need more sheep or something like that. And so in the ancient world as well as later, there is always this business about trading sides and not keeping a promise. But what happens here now is we're going to see that after the blessings and the curses, then you have something called the deposit, where you put it into a safe place. And then the last thing is a provision for public reading. How often were the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, to read this covenant out loud for everybody? Anybody gotten that far yet? Once every 7 years. They were to gather, and they gathered with Moses or with Joshua already at Shechem, and half of them stood on Mount Ebal, and half of them on Mount Gerizim, and some got the blessings, some got the curses, but they heard it all. Back after the exile, when Ezra is reading in the rain, he's reading probably what's in Deuteronomy here to the people out loud, and they finally said, you know, it's going to take a while to hear all this through. But it would have been a pretty long, rainy, wet afternoon to be able to listen to all that, and you'd have to be under a place where it was safe. But that you would hear this from time to time. How do we do our re-upping of the relationship?
What relationship you're talking
In
about?
our country, I should say.
Vote.
We call it elections, where we say, okay, here's how we want to go. So we have a democracy, not a monarchy or something like that. And so once every 4 years, we all have the chance to say, here's who I would want to have to be the leader of the country and representing me and judges in various courts and things like that. So we have a regular arrangement whereby we do that, but I've yet to see that before you can go vote that you have to read the Constitution through.
It's true.
You know, probably be a good idea. We're all supposed to have a civics course that we take going through school to be able to learn the basics of how all of that fits together. So I took mine in summer school. I driver's training and typing and government course, and just really enjoyed that very much, and I was able then to get a study hall my last year at high school. But we all had to do that. It's part of the requirement of being a good citizen. It gets a little difficult when we live in a country where some people don't want to be citizens of our country and want to fight against it, and think that it's okay to be able to go in different directions with it instead of whatever disagreements we might have, that we are under the same rule of law. Well, so in essence, God is the sovereign. He is the one who is in charge of everything. So the suzerain, as they would talk about it there, and the people are the vassals. But the strange difference is you start out with almost everything about, here's what I have done for you. So the preamble is just a few verses. The historical prologue is basically chapters 1 through 4. 5 to 11 and 12 to 26 are the stipulations, the laws, the rules, the Torah, the Torot, as we would talk about it. And then you have the blessings and curses. What will happen if you stay in this? What will happen if you leave it? And then the deposit, where they would be put. Where would the words of Moses be put? Well, we're told the 10 commandments, the 10 words, were put into the covenant box. The rest of it would have been somewhere around by the temple or the tabernacle at this point as well. And then the provision for public reading that, we don't know if any of this ever happened. Now, a lot of it that's here, we don't know if or when or how. We don't have stories about, well, it's the 7th year, and so everybody went up to be able to hear the law again. The 7th year would kind of match with if you had slaves, that you would free them in the 7th year. And so you kind of have people being reminded of what's going on. For some reason, because you don't have any writing, I mean, people would write, but that you don't have people with books and bookshelves and all of that kind of stuff, that would be the only way they'd be reminded. One interesting study, just before we look into some more of the details, one interesting study that I've been enjoying reading about is, where do laws show up in the prophets and in the historical books? So, for example, you might remember the story about, you might remember that story. Who's the guy who gets killed by Jezebel? Naboth. All I can think of is Achan. Naboth and his vineyard. So he says, this land was given to me by God. I can't sell it to the king. I can't sell my patrimony to the king. And then Jezebel gets him killed, and then says to her husband, take it over, it's okay now. He's gone. They accuse him of cursing God, and they stone him and put him to death. And later, Jezebel and some of the other family members will be killed by that place, where their blood will be shed as well. So you have that. In Amos, there is a complaint, you sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. So let's say that somebody owes someone money. And so I say, I got this new pair of shoes, I'll trade you the pair of shoes for Matilda. Okay, now she's mine. So for the small price of a pair of shoes, people are being bought and sold. And you'll have some things in the prophets, and a lot of them in the early part of Isaiah, particularly Isaiah 5, and mostly in 5 and then a little bit in chapter 10. It'll talk about a variety of ways you add field to field and house to house until there's no room for anybody else. So you're buying up other people's property. The prayer of Jabez, some of you might know about this from years ago, where it says, God, please expand my territory, which I always wonder about. It's in Chronicles, but I wonder about the prayer of Jabez, because how can God expand your property except by taking it away from somebody else? And yet that was going around. I was too cheap to buy the book, but I went and knelt down on one knee and read it through in Barnes & Noble or something, and Rosedale. It wasn't that long a read. And but I'm always going to look for a couple of things. And this is not exactly part of this, but does Jesus Christ need to be in that book?
It's not in that book.
It's not in that book.
I know.
It is not in that book.
Yeah.
If you are going to hear a sermon, it's more than just saying Jesus was a good man, be like him. Okay? If he didn't need to die and rise and change the human heart, you didn't hear any good news. You didn't hear any good news at all. You just heard a speech. It might be a nice moral speech, but you didn't hear any good news. And so here, when God is talking about, this is what I've already done for you, remember it and do not forget it, that's kind of like where we are in our Christian life right now. Except instead of the preamble of going through the wilderness, we have, through Christ, been brought from death to life. So the instruction doesn't come to say, if you do this, then you can go into the land of promise. They're perched and ready to go. So let's remember once more about the motivation of teleology and ontology. Because what does it mean if it says here in Deuteronomy, now if you do these things, then the Lord will bless you? Is that teleology or ontology? No. No. The plot thickens. You learned the answer very well. You learned it very well, and I messed it all up. Because the if-then, that's teleology, says you are not in a relationship, and by doing this, you get into it. Okay? So, if I'm nice enough to Kathy Holzel, she might get fooled into thinking I might be a good husband and marry me, which she did. And she found out later about what all that means. But if I say now, if I do this, then we will do this, it's within a relationship that already exists. It already is there. And so you can use an if-then statement in an ontological statement about a reality that's already there. The real issue is, do you do something to get it, or do you do something because you're in it? So there is a different relationship that I have with Kathy, whom I met many years ago, than I do with Dale. Because the relationship with Dale was already established long before we ever tried to set it up. It's our parents who set that relationship up. And so I was thinking about, he ain't heavy, he's my brother, but he ain't going to pick me up anymore. I know that. So the idea of a marriage versus a family kind of thing, he says, I've already made you a family. If it was teleology to get God to do something by what I do, then I would be trying to get into a treaty relationship by doing nice things. Okay, David does this when he is watching over the sheep of a man who is down in the southwestern part of the country. And so he says, well, I've been watching over your sheep. So, maybe you could do something nice for me. was real smart when we'd go down to see Tiger ball games, Dale and I, and drive down, and here's a kid says, if you give me $5, I'll watch your hubcaps. Now what do you do?
Give them $5.
We never gave the $5, we never lost our hubcaps. But it's the intimidation factor. Kathy and I were walking around the upper level of the wall in Jerusalem. And a little kid came walking along with us. We got all the way to the end, just north of the Temple Mount, came down the steps, and he says, now pay me. I was your tour guide. Wait a minute, we didn't hire you to be a tour guide. Or the people who, you go up to they wanted money for taking their picture. So you owe me money. Kathy has a real wonderful friend in, what city is that in Italy? With the guy in his armor. Yeah. It's the city where Romeo and Juliet are.
Verona?
Verona, yeah. So this guy's standing there, now pay me money. I didn't hire you. Now, so if God would say, I didn't ask you to do that, it's all a response to a relationship that's already there. And our marriage relationship does not depend on, if you do this, then I'll love you. It's because we love each other, therefore. Now, so if I say, well, if I do this, then we can do this. So if I carry the bucket of water around, then we can water the plants. It sounds like a teleological relationship, but it's really no. As we're taking care of our flowers, I'll do this part, you do this part. And what we have here in Deuteronomy, you're going to see if then. But don't pull it out from the context, because then you turn it into religion. You turn it into religion instead of faith. This is a response to faith. God is gracious, and faith is the response to his grace. So if you want to get someone to do something, and those of us who have talked about stewardship, if you want to get them to do something and they don't love Jesus, not going to happen. Or if they're not moved to love Jesus, it's not going to happen. All right? So if we want to get a Christian response, we're looking for one that's ontological. If somebody doesn't want to do giving, they need to hear more about Jesus who died and rose for them. That still might not motivate them, but they need to hear the faith, not the life. Right? And so I was talking with somebody the other day who remembered I did a Scripture in Life one year, and I did it with, I think it was Jerry Coleman, but we did Galatians and James. Galatians, saved by faith and not by works. James says faith without works is dead. Well, the one's teleological, the other's ontological. If you're trying to get God to love you, Galatians says, nope. If you want to be instructed about how you can express that love to God, James is wonderful. Luther didn't like it. I get those guys confused once in a while. Luther didn't like it because he saw people interpreting it as if it was the way to get God to love him. And that's because that's the way it works in our world. That's the way it works with paychecks. That's the way it works with the reward or punishment, is people are going to say, okay, you do this, then I'll give you this. And so at least you have to give someone a credit card if you're going to buy something in the store. Okay? And they expect that that's going to go through and that they're going to get their money out of it. If you just say, well, I kind of like this camera, I think I'll take it along. Somebody's going to say, no, you're not. That's illegal. Yeah, but I like it. That's what we call theft. I like it, it's yours, I'd like one, so I'll take yours. Because I'm sure you have enough money to buy another one. You have insurance, don't you? Go away. So, the key word, and I mentioned this already when we were looking at the concept of treaties and the 10 words in Exodus, the key word is love. Remember, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is the kind of love that says there is a bound relationship that we have together, which will be expressed in various ways. So if we didn't know each other and we were all at a ballpark, you don't necessarily know who's married to whom, and every once in a while the kiss cam gets it wrong, and they focus it on a couple of people. Oh, I'm not going to, you know. Or their brother and a sister sitting there. You know, it's the same kind of deal. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, is something that is not just the kind of heart-pumping love that might be somebody's first puppy love, as we say. It's something that says everything in my being goes into this relationship. And human beings, we are not going to always be able to make it. It's not always going to work, but we go in at least saying, this is what, from my side, I want to do. And there'll be times when somebody will say, I'm the one who's giving, the other is doing all the taking, or who knows all what goes on in the anguish of the lives that we live. But the relationship with God is one where he says, I'm not going to change this. Even if you sin against the relationship, I have died to take the consequences of that. I'm in it for eternity. And unless one would simply say, I want nothing to do with God, and reject him completely, even the sins that are willfully done are sins where he says, I put myself to death for this. So as we sit here, somebody's died because of us. There's a person who's dead in this world's history because of you and because of me. And he says, now I'm going to give you my perfection in your heart, and you do not have your sin there anymore in terms of the eternal consequences of what's going to happen. That's gone. That's as far as east to west. So now, therefore, as you hear this motivation, hear it as, here's how God has instructed me to stay living in a relationship with him and not going off to something else. And so this is what he says, this is how I built you to be. This is now that I've restored you. Here's how I make you and how I work in you, in your heart by my Spirit. And thus, we have two choices. Either I am active in that relationship or I go against it. And there'll be all sorts of squabbles about, is this a sin or is that a sin? We have to get the basic sense of, what did God build me to be? And so it's not just what's natural law, but it's what would God have made Adam and Eve to do before the fall? What's life going to be like in eternity? And how do we say to God, even though there may be something that I am driven to or choose to do, if this is not something that you have built for me, spoil it for me. Help me to keep from acting in that way. And so God is going to give them all these kinds of instructions. So let's listen now. I'm going to do a good bit of just reading and just listening to some of what we have here. So there is your treaty pattern from chapters 1 to 4, which is what we're going to look at now. And then the second time the law is given. What does deutero mean? Two. Have you ever heard of deuterium? Dale, what's deuterium?
H2.
Okay, now what does H2 mean?
2 hydrogen atoms.
2 hydrogen
Atoms.
atoms?
To make
What's,
one molecule.
huh?
To make one molecule.
Okay. Deuterium, though, and tritium, isn't that within the hydrogen atom itself?
Tritium is 3.
Not 3 molecules, though, but 3,
3 H's.
huh?
3 H's.
3, I thought it was heavy hydrogen, that there would be 2 protons, or 2 neutrons. I'll have to check that out. I've heard of as heavy water, but that there would...
I'm sorry, you're correct.
Is it protons or protons or neutrons that would be?
The proton makes it the atom, and the isotope, you add another neutron to it.
So another neutron, so it'd be 2 neutrons then?
Yeah.
Okay. And then tritium would be 3, right? I think.
1 proton and 2 neutrons.
1 proton and 2 neutrons.
Hydrogen has no neutrons, just 1 proton.
Okay, so if you had 1 neutron, it's deuterium. If you had 2, it's tritium. Okay, which is very unstable, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, the word deutero is the Greek word for 2, and tritium, the word for 3. I think is that. I want to say, is it Greek or Latin? Must be Latin because it's named, it sounds more Latin. It sounds more
So is
Latin.
deuterocanonical the same thing?
Deuterocanonical are the books of the Bible that were decided to be inspired at the second wave of it at the Council of Trent.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so deuterocanonicals, they're all considered inspired by the Roman Catholic Church. We would call them the Apocrypha. So the proto-canonical would be way back at the time of the early church, and then deuterocanonical. So, but anyway, Deuteronomy means the second time the law is given, because we have it not only in Exodus 20, but in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And so you got the same thing in two different places. But anyway, I'm going to start with verse 6, and just that you get a feel for some of this. The Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Resume your journey and go into the hill country of the Amorites, as well as into the neighboring regions, the Arabah, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negev, and the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land that I swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and to their descendants after them. That's known as a promise that's getting fulfilled. Now, you won't see the entire amount of land taken until 2 Samuel 8, where David will take all of this land or make treaties with a couple of the regions up there in the north. So what was promised to Abraham about 1900 BC, David will take it about 1000 BC. So that's a long time before you see a promise delivered. All right, and people are always wondering, when's Jesus going to return? It may be AD 483,000. Okay, nothing that says we're not the early church. Augustine would laugh if he heard somebody say he was the early church. He was in the 400s, 300s, and 400s. But what do you mean early church? Well, you get far enough away from it, and then you begin to talk that way. And so here, God says, I've been keeping this promise. I haven't failed. And at that time I said to you, I am unable by myself to bear you. The Lord your God has multiplied you so that today you are as numerous as the stars of heaven. Does that ring a bell?
Back in Genesis.
Genesis 15. With the fiery pot, God says, I'm going to make your descendants like the stars of heaven or the sand on the seashore, which would be even more, at least for visible. I would imagine 100 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars in each one.
I guess, I forgot. I have to look it up again.
It's some ludicrous number. One galaxy, the Milky Way, with 100 billion stars in it, one of which is the sun. And astronomers guess there might be 100 billion galaxies. So we haven't gotten that far yet with the number of people who've ever lived. Yes?
What does it mean when he's, I am not able to bear you by myself?
Moses.
Moses is saying
Moses
that.
is
Okay.
saying, I told God I can't carry this crowd. May the God of your ancestors increase you 1,000 times more and bless you as he has promised you. But how can I bear the heavy burden of your disputes all by myself? Choose for each of your tribes individuals who are wise, discerning, and reputable among your leaders. You answered me, the plan you have proposed is a good one. So I took the leaders of your tribes, wise and reputable individuals, installed them as leaders over you, commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, commanders of 50s, commanders of 10s, and officials throughout your tribes. I charged your judges at that time, give the members of your community a fair hearing, and judge rightly between one person and another, whether citizen or resident alien. You must not be partial in judgment, hearing out the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is God's. Any case that's too hard for you, bring to me, and I will hear it. So I charged you at that time with all the things that you should do. Kathy's oldest sister is Phyllis. And Phyllis and Don have now been married over 60 years. And Don shared with us at their 50th anniversary. He said that when they got married, they made a decision together about how they would run their marriage. Phyllis would decide all the small cases, and Don would decide all the great and heavy and weighty cases. And he said, we haven't had a weighty one yet.
Yeah.
Then just as the Lord our God had ordered us, we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness that you saw, on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, until we reached Kadesh Barnea. I said to you, you have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has given the land to you. Go up and take possession as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised you. Do not fear or be dismayed. May as well get it up to chapter 1 here. So, all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead of us to explore the land for us and bring back a report to us regarding the route by which we should go up in the cities we will come to. The plan seemed good to me, and I selected 12 of you, one from each tribe. They set out and went up into the hill country, and when they reached the valley of Eshcol, they spied it out and gathered some of the land's produce, which they brought down to us. They brought back a report to us and said, it's a good land that the Lord our God is giving us. Now, notice a couple things here. First of all, earlier it said that they went through the whole country. Here, he just talks about the valley of Eshcol. Eshcol means a cluster of grapes. That's what it means. It's one of those strange quadriliterals. Pastor, you know what a quadriliteral is? The most well-known quadriliteral is Yahweh, Yod, He, Vav, He. Hebrew is a language which is based on 3 root letters. M-L-K for Malak or Melech, Kaf, Beit Dalet for Kavod, heavy or something like this. But sometimes you get 4 letters, and the L on the end is usually the extra letter. And so the valley of Eshcol is the valley where that may be picking up a foreign word that came into their vocabulary. But anyway, so first of all, the Lord promised it, and it's a good land. So what the Lord promised, that is good. So they brought some of the produce back. They said it's a good land. And the next word, but. That's the word of sin. But. But you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You grumbled in your tents and said, it's because the Lord hates us that he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to destroy us. Where are we headed? Our kindred have made our hearts melt by reporting. The people are stronger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified up to heaven. We actually saw there the offspring of the Anakim. I said, you have no dread or fear of them. The Lord your God who goes before you is the one who will fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your very eyes. Were any of those people there at the sea parting? Any of the people he's talking to? Yeah, people he's talking to now. Were any of them there?
No, they weren't, were they?
Huh?
40 years, they could have been little.
They could have been little. Only the 20-year-olds and upward were to die out in the wilderness. Anybody who was from 0 to 20 would have gone through and remembered it. So these people saw that miracle. All right? But God can only pull out once in a great while, right? Then you're on your own. And in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you, just as one carries a child, all the way that you traveled until you reached this place. So, a little bit about the wilderness, and some reference to the sea and all of that. But in spite of this, you have no trust in the Lord your God, who goes before you on the way you seek out a place for you to camp in fire by night and cloud by day to show you the route you should take. When the Lord heard your words, he was wrathful and swore, not one of these, not one of this evil generation shall see the good land that I swore to give to your ancestors, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and to his descendants I will give the land on which he set foot, because of his complete fidelity to the Lord. Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account, saying, you also shall not enter there. So he kind of flips the blame over to them and says, you guys even got me in trouble. Yeah, that's not, that's kind of like what Aaron does some other places. Joshua the son of Nun, your assistant, shall enter there. Encourage him, for he is the one who will secure Israel's possession of it. And as for your little ones who you thought would become booty, your children who today do not yet know right from wrong, they shall enter there. To them I will give it, and they shall take possession of it. But as for you, journey back into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds. You answered me, we have sinned against the Lord. We're ready to go up and fight, just as the Lord our God commanded us. So
all of you strapped on your battle gear, and thought it easy to go up into the hill country, the Lord said to me, say to them, do not go up and do not fight, for I am not in the midst of you. Otherwise you will be defeated by your enemies. Although I told you, you would not listen. You rebelled against the command of the Lord and presumptuously went up into the hill country. The Amorites who lived in that hill country then came out against you and chased you as bees do. They beat you down to Seir as far as Hormah. When you returned and wept before the Lord would neither heed your voice nor pay you any attention. After you had stayed at Kadesh many days as you did, we journeyed back into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea, as the Lord had told me, and skirted Mount Seir for many days. So now we're in chapter 2. So we're going to go around the country of Edom here. Seir is one of the cities in Edom. Okay, and so it says we went around that whole country. Then the Lord said to me, you have been skirting this hill country long enough, head north and charge the people as follows. You are about to pass through the territory of your kindred, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir. They'll be afraid of you, so be very careful not to engage in battle with them. For I will not give you even so much as a foot's length of their land, since I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. So, God gives lands to lots of people. He says, here's where you are. Stay there, not just to his own people. You shall purchase food from them for money, so that you may eat, and you shall also buy water from them for money, so that you may drink. Surely the Lord your God has blessed you in all your undertakings. He knows you're going through this great wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. So we passed by our kin, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, leaving behind the road of the Arabah, leaving behind Elat and Ezion-Geber. That's at the northern edge of the Gulf of Aqaba. If you have looked at a map, the Sinai Peninsula is a triangle with the point at the bottom, the fulcrum at the bottom. To the left is the Gulf of Suez, to the right is the Gulf of Aqaba. And so at the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba is where Elat and Ezion-Geber are. That's where Solomon later will have a port which would go all the way to India. Bring back peacocks and monkeys and pistachios and all sorts of great stuff. Later that gets rebuilt by later kings, Rehoboam II, I believe, and it gets caught in a storm and destroyed. Elat, if you were to go for a really nice outing today and you were from Israel, that's where you go. The scuba diving and snorkeling, I am told, is just astounding, that it's beautiful, clear, turquoise water. So that's when they gave back land to Egypt at the time when they made the treaty with Egypt, they made sure that they kept Elat and Ezion-Geber. Okay, just right at the very southern tip there. I throw in too many stories, but they're fun. When we were on our dig, Kathy and I, in southern Israel, we were at this place called Tel Masos, which some think was this Hormah. And this one kid, he decided one weekend to go down to Elat. He thought, I'll just sleep on the beach. And so he said, I don't want him to take my luggage. So he had a knapsack, so he just held on to it and fell asleep. In the morning, all that was there were his handles. Somebody had some heavy kind of something, chopped them off and took what he had. That's my Elat story. You don't get any others. So anyway, where did we land here? Verse 18. Today you are going to cross the boundary of Moab at Ar. When you approach the frontier of the Ammonites, do not harass them or engage them in battle, for I will not give you the land of the Ammonites to you as a possession, because I have given it to the descendants of Lot. It also is usually reckoned as a land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly inhabited it, though the Ammonites call them the Zamzumim. Strong and numerous people as tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them from before the Ammonites so that they could dispossess them and settle in their place. In the 1900 before Christ, there is a massive movement of people groups. And those who had been there, like the Anakim and the Rephaim and the Zamzumim and the Amim and a couple of other ones, they all get dispossessed by somebody else. Okay, and so it says here, God gave the Ammonites and Moabites and the Edomites their land, gave the Philistines their land, so leave them alone. they all have their part as well. He did the same for the descendants of Esau who live in Seir by destroying the whole realm before them, so that they could dispossess them and settle in their place even to this day. Now the whole realm, that comes from the word Hor, which is the word for the mountain that Aaron was buried on. He was buried up on Mount Hor, so down in the Edomite region, which is where, if you were to go now, what's the place with the red walls in the Raiders? Huh? Petra.
Petra.
Petra. That's the land of the Edomites. The word.
That sounds official.
The cathedral wall is coming down. It's a birthday celebration.
I've never heard that one before.
Oh, you haven't? Is that a warning about a car, about some child being taken?
No, it's something from Messenger.
Okay, all right. As for the Avim, who had lived in settlements in the valley in the vicinity of Gaza, the Kaphtorim, who came from Kaphtor, which is the same as the island of Cyprus, destroyed them and settled in their place. So the Philistines, which are the Kaphtorim and the Pelishtim and others, they actually came from Greece and from Cyprus. Cyprus, do any of you know what that word means? Dale? Cupric sulfide?
Copper.
Copper. Many great copper mines in Cyprus, but they also brought iron technology with them. So what probably happened is when you get into the Philistine territory, you got these little short Greek people who, when they came in, the tall people, some of the tall people, they left them, like Goliath and his crowd, for hundreds of years, and they just made peace with them. But when they brought in the iron technology, then they could start doing a better job of plowing and harvesting. And so the Iron Age is right at this time. So we're at the beginning of the Iron Age. You have the Copper Age, and then the Bronze, the Old Bronze, Middle Bronze, and Late Bronze Age, and about 1200. As the Philistines are coming in here, then you have the beginning of the Iron Age. And so we'll see, David will talk about the fact that, or it'll talk about only David and Jonathan, I think, had spears. Everybody else had other kinds of weapons. And they'd have to go down and get the weapons sharpened down by the Philistines. They knew the iron technology.
Philistines came from Greece?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason they know that is because local clay was used to make their pottery, but the designs are Greek designs.
Sure.
And Trudy and Moshe Dotan did their life's work, a couple of Israeli archaeologists down there in that region. And Trudy even, Trudy Dotan, yeah, and her husband. I've got the pottery book from her that shows all the different patterns. So it's local clay. They know how to do that,
Sure.
but it's
Greek design.
Greek designs.
Yeah.
Red and black ware is what they call that. So proceed on your journey and cross the Wadi Arnon. See, I've handed over to you the king Sihon of the Amorite of Heshbon and his land. Begin to take possession by engaging him in battle. This day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under heaven. When they hear a report of you, they will tremble and be in anguish because of you. So God says, I'm getting them scared. So I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemot to King Sihon of Heshbon with the following terms of peace. If you let me pass through your land, I will travel only along the road. I will turn aside neither to the right nor to the left. You shall sell me food for money so that I may eat, and supply me water for money so that I may drink. Only allow me to pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau who live in Seir have done for me, and likewise the Moabites who live in Ar, until I cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord our God is giving us. But King Sihon of Heshbon was not willing to let us pass through, for the Lord your God had hardened his spirit and made his heart defiant in order to hand him over to you, as he has now done. The Lord said to me, see, I have begun to give Sihon his land over to you. Begin now to take possession of his land. So when Sihon came out against us, he and all his people for battle at Jahaz, the Lord our God gave him over to us, and we struck him down, along with his offspring and all his people. At that time we captured all his towns, and in each town we utterly destroyed men, women, and children. We left not a single survivor. Only the livestock we kept as spoil for ourselves, as well as the plunder of the towns that we had captured from Aroer on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, including the town that is in the Wadi itself, as far as Gilead. There was no citadel too high for us. The Lord our God gave everything to us. You did not encroach, however, on the land of the Ammonites, avoiding the whole upper region of the Wadi Jabbok, as well as the towns of the hill country, just as the Lord our God had charged. So we're east of the Jordan River here now, going north up toward the Sea of Galilee, but on the east side of it. So they didn't go up through the land. They went around the Dead Sea, and they were going up from there. So Moses won't get in the promised land. He'll be able to see it. So chapter 2, then, we have finished, right?
Yep.
Okay, so chapter 3, I'm just going to look at this briefly. So this is about the defeat of Og, the king of Bashan. Same kind of talk about the Rephaim. And then Reuben and Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh say, we would like to stay on this side. Can we have the land over here? So the land of Og and the land of Sihon. And Moses says, yeah, as long as you're willing to go over and help your brothers conquer the land west of the Jordan, yeah, you leave your family here, you can go over there, and then you can come back. And they say, that's a good idea, we will do that. So Moses had asked to visit the land, and yes?
Is this referral of Bashan, is it the same Bashan that's referred to in Psalm 22? The cows of Bashan?
The cows of Bashan are in Amos.
But
But
isn't that part of it?
Bashan may be in Psalm 22
I
as
think
well.
it is.
Bulls, many
but-
bulls of Bashan.
Bulls
Oh,
of Bashan,
bulls, yeah.
Yeah,
Is it the same
that God, God says in that one with the bulls of Bashan, I don't need that many animals for sacrifice. I don't need any sacrifices from you at all. The cows of Bashan are about the women in Amos.
Oh, yes.
Either chapter 4 or 5 it begins, who are getting rich off most of the other people.
Yes.
But yeah, the bulls of Bashan. Thank you, Pastor. So anyway, Joshua is told that he will see it but not go in, and Moses is told that Joshua is going to be his successor. And then in chapter 4, it says, now give heed to the statutes. Let's take a break. All right, so we will look at parts of these next chapters. I'm not going to read through all, but I'd like to read through chapter 4. It's a very summarizing kind of a deal. So now, Israel, give heed to the statutes and ordinances that I am teaching you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. You must neither add anything to what I command you, nor take away anything from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God with which I am charging you. You have seen for yourselves what the Lord did with regard to Baal of Peor, how the Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed the Baal of Peor. While those of you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. So it's not like you're on the road and you come to the fork in the road. You're on the road and you can hop off. Okay, or you can stay on the road. So there's going to be actions, there's going to be things people will do. But it's not as if you are given these choices. The unbeliever has only the ability to go against God. The believer can, by the new heart, only go in keeping with God. Our old heart that's there will finally disappear on the day of judgment, and so God still recognizes that we are going to rebel against him, whether willfully or not. But the prime nature that we ought to see for ourselves is that new nature. Okay, Luther says we're simul justus et peccator. We are at the same time simultaneously justified and a sinner. One of them's a noun, one of them is more like an adjective. I am a justified sinner. Okay, so it's not justified and sinning, but it's a justified sinner. So my nature, I cannot get beyond that to the point that I would ever quit being a sinner. This book by Karl Volz that I'm reading, some of the heresies that happened in the 11 and 1200s were people who thought they could get good enough to be perfect before God. That happens throughout history.
It happens to people who have done something wrong and are trying to make up for it. I will try to be so good now, and maybe I can escape the consequences of what I did wrong. Satan just loves that. Because as long as I'm doing that, I'm concentrating on what's in the mirror. What do I see? How am I doing? When we're doing something for others, in some sense, it's not like you forget altogether, but the prime thing isn't, are people watching me? But am I able to do this for somebody else? So, a doctor who says, I'm going to do the surgery so I can show everybody I'm a good surgeon, probably isn't going to be a very good doctor. Okay, ought to be thinking about that patient right now. And would you agree with that? Having spent lots of years in surgery as a surgical nurse. So, and Alita has also said that after a while you figure out which guys you don't want to have operate on you.
Very quickly you figure that
Very
out.
quickly you figure that out. So, chapter 4, verse 5. See, just as the Lord my God has charged me, I now teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Part of the teaching says I might not know if something is in keeping with the Lord or away from it. So he gives me some guidance and some help. This is not what you want to do. So you might say, well, I'm not sure about this one. And it at least gives, for instances, of what might be going on there. You must observe them diligently, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what other great nation has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances just as this entire law that I am setting before you today? But take care. Watch yourselves closely, so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor to let them slip from your mind all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and to your children's children, how you once stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord said to me, assemble the people for me, and I will let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me as long as they live on the earth, and may teach their children so. You approached and stood at the foot of the mountain while the mountain was blazing up to the very heavens, shrouded in dark clouds. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but you saw no form. There was only a voice. He declared to you his covenant, which he charged you to observe, that is, the 10 Commandments, or as my little note puts down here, the 10 words. And he wrote them on 2 stone tablets. And the Lord charged me at that time to teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy. So now it says here are the ordinances for in the land. There's things that you're not going to come up with. If you're out in the desert, what meaning is there in moving your neighbor's boundary stone? Now, it might be there, but it's not quite so urgent as if you're going to roll that thing a couple of feet every year and buy a little more land that way. No, that's where I remember it, steel. Since you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, take care and watch yourselves closely so that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water and under the earth. And when you look up to the heavens and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, do not be led astray and bow down to them and serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples everywhere under heaven, but the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron smelter out of Egypt to become a people of his very own possession as you are now. Interestingly, it means the Iron Age has begun in Egypt as well. The Philistines tried to go into Egypt, and the Egyptians said, no, but you can go live close. And so then they went up around by the Gaza Strip area. Yes?
Is form there the same as image back in Genesis 2?
Yes. I don't know about the words. There's the word tselem, and let's see, what's the other word? Tselem is one of the words. I don't remember the other one right off the top of my head. But these would be the kind of things of this is not for you. But as you hear it, I mean, we just ticked off everything in Genesis 1,
Yeah.
which are all the things that God made,
and not to be seen as the powers that one could use. Verse 21, the Lord was angry with me because of you, and he vowed that I should not cross the Jordan, that I should not enter the good land that the Lord your God is giving you for your possession. For I'm going to die in this land without crossing over the Jordan, but you are going to cross over to take possession of that good land. So be careful not to forget the covenant that the Lord your God made with you, and not to make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything that the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. So he says, don't toy with me. And so much of this is about, if you're going to go after another God, you're actually leaving the relationship. Okay, so there are some things where I may forget to tithe from the 10 pennies that I found when I was walking. That's not the big deal. It's when you say, I'm going to go to an entirely different relationship. And so it's not like, well, I can have both and. It's going to be, there are some things that are either or. If you leave the relationship, then the consequences are going to come upon you. I've often said that if the congregation comes to the point where they have to remove somebody as a member, it ought to be with great sadness and sorrow and tears, not good, we're rid of them now. But that you have done everything you can to try to help them to hear the gospel. And I've had people say to me, I'm beyond that now. That's just not me anymore. Sometimes I'm not just smart aleck, we will say, well, I'm going to keep you in my prayers before the Lord, even if you don't think he exists. But there comes a time when people say, either about a particular congregation or about the Christian faith, that's just not me. People are always welcome to come back. But at some point, those who are members need to see a way in which they honor and serve the Lord. As I'm reading this through, just remember that the Jewish people, I believe it's usually in the fall of the year, sometime in October, have what they call Simchat Torah, rejoicing in the law. And because of Paul and Luther's way of interpreting it, we often think of the law only accuses. If I am outside the relationship and I hear what God built me to be, I will always rebel against it. My old nature will always rebel against it. You're nuts. You got to be nuts. Inside the relationship, where his grace has settled my heart, then it's thank you for the guidance. And that's where we get into the trouble when we understand what's the law in Christian living. So I can encourage you. I can't demand anything of you. I can't assign to you a certain way to do something. I can encourage that, but it's not like we're Christians, and so Jesus died to save me. I'm going to do what I want from now until he comes back, and then he'll take me to be with him in heaven. He calls for us to gather with others, to worship, and he says it's dangerous if we don't. So Christian living is not, as many people will say, and I know it's in the New Testament this way at places, but don't think of the law as imperative. Okay? Think of it as exhortative. I can exhort you to do something. I can say, come on, let's do this way. So instead of Jesus sitting down there saying, you do this for me, he's got his arm around our shoulder saying, come on, let's go this way. And Christians are also responsible for each other. We're not to just say, do what you want. You're a Christian, I'm a Christian, but to say, the Lord gives us guidance about what is proper or improper. Doesn't mean it's easy to deal with this in all situations. We all know that. But that we would say, here's the direction in which we believe the Lord leads us to live out our life. That he who has forgiven us then says, let the sins of others be gone as well. And so it's always going to be kind of a muddy area because life is that way. But the Lord is going to say, don't think that I don't have any interest in how you live your daily life, how you deal with your time and your talents and your treasures. And so sometimes it's warning people, watch out, this wouldn't be a good way to go. Now, by the time of the prophets like Isaiah and Hosea and Amos and Micah particularly, and then Jeremiah and Ezekiel, plus some of the others, pretty much before the exile, they do very little calling people to repent.
They had their chance and it's too late. And so when people say, well, the prophets call people to repentance, there are some who do. And there are some places where that happens. But that's not the prime thing. It's you've left the relationship, here is what's going to happen, and you brought it on yourself. Don't go blaming me, or don't go blaming God for this. I thought God loved me. I thought she loved me. I thought she said she'd be my wife forever. Yeah, well, you've had 14 affairs since then. So what? She said she'd love me. Well, at a certain point, nobody takes that. And God doesn't take it either. What he knows of when a heart is hardened, we don't know. I would rather be merciful as long as I can with somebody, hoping that they're a dimly burning wick or a bruised reed, rather than shake the dust off the feet and say, okay, be lost. So I don't want to give up on people quickly, because people are not dead wood, they're people he died for. Yet there are cases where people may be what we would call humanly weak in the faith. They're saved, but maybe not thinking much about how to act on that, or they've got agendas that they believe are more important. But every Christian who is alive will bear fruit, which is every Christian is alive in Christ. They will bear fruit one way or another. That might not be the way I want them to, but they will be doing the things the Lord is moving them to do. So it's not like we can say, well, there's good Christians and bad Christians. No such thing. There are those who in different ways will live that out. But does the Lord call us to go and be monks or nuns? Or call us to be in church 167 hours a week and we get out for 1 hour? There is no perfection in it. And the Lord says, this isn't something to live up toward. It's something to live out. I haven't mentioned my tomato plants yet. Our tomato plants, have I? When will my tomato plant really be a tomato plant? It is already. How much fruit does it have to bear to be a tomato plant? None. It's a tomato plant from the beginning that it starts growing. I have no idea how much it's going to bear. But we have this plaque up on the garage that says to the tomato plant, pull out the weeds from around your roots, and make sure you get enough water, make sure you get fertilizer, and make sure that you get powder to put on your leaves so that the bugs don't get you, and put up a sign around yourself that the animals are not to bother you, correct?
Good luck with that.
Good luck with that. And it's natural that it's going to do that. Christians will naturally do that. Do we need strengthening? Yeah. The parable of the soils. It's not the parable of the seed or the parable of the sower. It's the parable of the soils. Is there anything wrong with the soil that the sower puts the seed in? No. There's impediments in the soil. It may be that it got stomped down hard because it's on the path. It may be that it's got rocks in it. But the soil might be still good, just rocks are in the way of it doing its thing. It may be that the soil needs a little fertilizer, needs some rocks taken out, needs some weeds to be pulled. The soil is fine. The seed is fine. But there are all sorts of things that get in the way. And so a lot of what we need to do as Christians is say, what's getting in the way of my Christian life? What's in the way of others? And gently then encourage and say, this is not a healthy thing. And to look at, here's what God built us to be. So in some ways, this is the Garden of Eden writ large. Here are things that, instead of just 2 trees in the garden, now God would say, well, stay away from that. Stay away from that. Take some of this fruit. Do this. And not in the sense of God's rules. And if your Bible has God's rules in it, then cross that out and just put God's promises or something like that, or God's encouragement. But God's rules is a teleological term. So here he says, he's giving you the land. There'll be things to do, but it's not with the gun to the head from someone sitting way down there waiting to see what you will do. Our former governor, Jesse Ventura, was, when he was in high school, He said one day the coach couldn't come to the football practice. And so a bunch of the guys said, oh, good, we don't have to practice so hard today. He said, we're still going to play the game. I got to practice just as hard today as if the coach is here. We're living out our life. It's not like, well, I'll only be good when I'm around other Christians. This is what is healthy for a relationship with God and others. And so to read the scriptures is not to find out what we're supposed to do, but to find out which direction he's leading us for looking out among ourselves with others and to love and care for them. So that's what he's talking about here with them as well. Verse 25, when you have had children and children's children become complacent in the land, if you act corruptly by making an idol in the form of anything, thus doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, and provoking to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will not live long on it, but will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples. Only a few of you will be left among the nations where the Lord will lead you. That's a commentary in advance on Amos and Hosea and Isaiah and Micah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and a few others. That's what they did. This is the lead-in to the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. There you will serve other gods made by human hands, objects of wood and stone, neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. From there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and soul. In your distress, when all these things have happened to you in time to come, you will return to the Lord your God and heed him. Because the Lord your God is a merciful God, he will neither abandon you nor destroy you. He will not forget the covenant with your ancestors that he swore to them. But there may be a price to pay in the middle. And it may be your grandkids who survive that. For ask now about former ages, long before your own, ever since the day that God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one heaven to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened? Or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any people ever heard the voice of a God speaking out of a fire, as you have heard and lived? Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm? Sounds right like Exodus 15, 14 and 15 with the Song of the Sea. By terrifying displays of power as the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes, to you it was shown so that you would acknowledge that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he showed you his great fire while you heard his words coming out of the fire. And because he loved your ancestors, he chose their descendants after them. He brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than yourselves, to bring you in, giving you their land for a possession, as it is still today. Now people get really uptight about this, that God goes and kills people. And all that Moses would be saying here is God had given these other people somehow the chance to change their ways and reject what they were doing, and he gave them enough slack until they finally said, no, we're going to keep doing what we were doing. We don't know if what we have here in the Bible is the only people who ever heard the gospel. I mean, the words of Moses, or the words of God. There may be others, we just don't know about that whole story. We don't know how God would have communicated with others. He just says, through you I'm bringing a blessing, but we ought not assume, maybe it would be Melchizedek. Maybe it would be Moses' father-in-law, Reuel or Jethro. That there are others who know who this God is. And so they rejected that, and finally he says, watch out, because heaven and earth are witness, or nobody else that he can have as witnesses to the covenant, but they are witnesses. So acknowledge today and take to heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. There is no other. Keep his statutes and his commandments, which I am commanding you today for your own well-being, and that your descendants after you, so that you may long remain in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all time. Then Moses set apart on the east side of the Jordan 3 cities to which a homicide could flee, someone who unintentionally kills another person, the two not having been at enmity before. The homicide could flee to one of these cities and live. Bezer in the wilderness, on the tableland belonging to Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead belonging to the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan belonging to the Manassites. So now you know where Golan is?
Okay, our country has recently said Israel has right to the Golan Heights. That's the Golan, okay, up in the north. So this is the law that Moses set before the Israelites. These are the decrees and the statutes and the ordinances that Moses spoke to the Israelites when they had come out of Egypt beyond the Jordan in the valley opposite Beth Peor, in the land of King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned at Heshbon, and whom Moses and the Israelites defeated when they came out of Egypt. They occupied his land and the land of King Og of Bashan, the two kings of the Amorites on the eastern side of the Jordan from Aroer, which is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon as far as Mount Sirion, that is Hermon, together with all the Arabah on the east side of the Jordan as far as the Sea of the Arabah under the slopes of Pisgah. That's the historical prologue. Now we get to two shots at the stipulations. I'll read chapter 5 and then dance around a little bit with some of the others between 5 and 11 to get a little bit of the flavor of that. So, Moses convened all Israel and said to them, by the way, any questions before I get into this?
You said this was the stipulations, beginning of the stipulations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which we could also call the rules or the laws or whatever. But 5 to 11 has a whole different mood than 12 to 26. 5 to 11 is pretty much just armor on the shoulder. Come on, remember this, don't forget it. And that's what you're going to see in a lot of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. The people forgot. A fellow that is pretty big in Old Testament studies, I wrote a paper once that I ran by him. He was not as impressed as I was with it, which is no grand and great and glorious surprise. Walt Brueggemann. But I said, I'd like to compare Deuteronomy and Job. Because in Job has everything, loses it, and says, God is my God. Deuteronomy says, they had nothing, God gave them everything, and then they left him. So the juxtaposition. So you got nothing, God says, I'm going to give you everything. When they got it, then they said, now we don't need God anymore. Now we know good and evil in our own mind. Whereas Job wouldn't curse God even when he had everything and lost it all. It's two different kinds of material, and I understand that. One's in wisdom literature and one's in the Torah. But those aren't necessarily that far apart. Because wisdom literature very often is simply another form of instruction. Here's a good way to do something, here's a bad way to do something. Yep.
I don't know if it's helpful, but C.S. Lewis does a thing going back to what kind of people have a God like this. He says that cultures had encountered the divine in all sorts of ways with sacrificial systems. But Lewis says this is the first time that the connection between the divine and a moral code, the kind of thing that Hammurabi had done, get connected together.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fascinating.
I think that's right on. So they would, in other words, if you worshiped the other gods, there was nothing moral about it. If there was involved in sexual rights and things like that, there was no moral code whatever. The kings made moral codes. The gods gave rain and sunshine and crops and herds and things like that.
But this God cares about the people.
Yes. And the trouble is, if you say, these other people know how to make this happen, if I know Baal knows how to make it rain, and Yahweh had me in the wilderness where it didn't rain for 40 years except that manna stuff that quit, then 1 is good, 2 is better, 3 is better yet. And so they would not have seen the juxtaposition of those. They would have thought, well, this is good for this, this is good for this. I dare say, if you want to know how to fix your car, you don't go read the Bible. Okay, you go to the mechanic's Bible maybe, or something like that. And so these people would have seen whole areas that would have been just completely outside the realm of the faith, or what we would say is religion. I went to church on Sunday, now leave me alone. But thank you for that, Yahweh. Okay, Moses convened all Israel and said, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I am addressing to you today. You shall learn them and observe them diligently. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. Not with our ancestors did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain out of the fire. At that time I was standing between the Lord and you to declare to you the words of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up the mountain. And he said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. All right? You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of the parents, to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Ever heard that before? Where? Reverend?
The close of Luther's commandment.
Close of Luther's commandments, the explanation. Now, there are people who say that that's the second commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. The Roman Catholic Church, I believe, and the Lutheran Church stayed with, that's all what I read you, just the first commandment. You shall have no other gods, not make a graven image or anything like that. And then the others would come up with coveting as 9 and 10 would become number 10. Okay, but there's a whole lot of motivation in here. We had some already in Exodus and more here. So I'm going to read these through, and then we'll go back and we'll look at it in Exodus just for the comparison. So you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. That can be by Christians too. That can be by people who say, well, I'm going to ask God to do this or that, and then he has to do it because I've asked him in his name. A name is equal to power. So when Kathy and I were in Berlin for my Fulbright grant, and we went to the United States Embassy in Berlin, that was the United States in that place. That's a little bit of the United States there, and the ambassador is the representative of the United States in that place on behalf of the fellow citizens of the country. And so he is in the name and empowered to be able to do whatever is necessary to carry on the business of the country. And so when we say, hallowed be thy name, holy be your name, that is more than just, well, I hope we use it the right way. It's to recognize that name and power, that God does something, and this is the way we address him. And because we address him as I am, he says, make a picture of that. You can't make a picture of an intransitive verb. Hard enough to make a picture of a transitive one, but intransitive verb to be, you can't make a picture of that. So God says, I'm above any picture that you're going to make. And human beings who want to protect themselves say, what can I do to try to attract some big power up there? Idolatry is manipulation. So how can I get that big person to do something? My best example of idolatry, and I probably used it back earlier, is a kid in the checkout line at Target, looking at the candy. Does whatever's necessary to get that candy. Mommy, I was good. I didn't try to get out of the cart. Mommy, can I have the Three Musketeers? Or screaming bloody murder until the parent says, everyone around here is going to think I just blasted the kid in the head. I better give him the candy and get him to shut up. That's idolatry. Little person trying to make a big person do something. And what the Bible says is, all the idols, there is no big behind anything. They don't exist. But people have made up the idea that they exist, and so they think, well, the storm, that must be a massive power. That's why I made that. The sun, that must be a massive power. That's why I made that. Genesis 1 is a confession of faith. God says, I made all that stuff. That you're now worshiping as if it's something with power. I put that in there. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, so that your days may be long, and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So Paul says this is the first commandment with promise. That now we get that your days may be long. You must have done a good job, Dale. Store I don't think you picked up your clothes as much as I did, but that's okay. We did a good job of being good kids, by and large. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. Neither shall you commit adultery. Neither shall you steal. Notice how the neither shall gets at the idea that this is don't. It's not imperative. Don't. Neither shall you do this. Neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. Neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife. Neither shall you desire your neighbor's house or field or male or female slave or ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. These words the Lord spoke with a loud voice to your whole assembly at the mountain out of the fire, the cloud, and the thick darkness, and he added no more. He wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. When you heard the voice out of the darkness while the mountain was burning with fire, you approached me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. You said, look, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard his voice out of that fire. Today we have seen that God may speak to someone, and the person may still live. So now, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer, we shall die. For who is there of all flesh that has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the fire as we have and remained alive? Go near, you yourself, and hear all that the Lord God, our God, will say. Then tell us everything that the Lord our God tells you, and we will listen and do it. So, boy, we're scared. You go fry. We don't want to fry. The Lord heard your words when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard the words of this people, which they have spoken to you. They are right in all they have spoken. If only they had such a mind as this to fear me and to keep all my commandments always, so that it might go well with them and with their children forever. Now you see, here's where people will immediately turn this into a law. So, to keep all my commandments always, so that it might go well with them. All right? If the already is there, you want to keep having this good stuff, you keep doing this, and things will go well. But it's not the, you aren't in it yet. And that's why if we take this out of context, 10 Commandments really probably don't belong in courthouses either. That's not the problem. You know, that's yanked them out of this and made them a bunch of just plain old religious rules. They might be nice rules, but they don't have I'm the Lord your God before it. This is a Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite document that God gave. And it's not something that is just, well, we'll plug this in. So I might obey all that stuff and still not have anything to do with God. Okay? Because it starts, you should have no other gods. Yeah, Dale?
A silly question, but I still wonder how all this could have gone on 2 tablets of stone.
The
All these
10
words.
the 10 words. The 10 words. You shall have no other gods. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not kill, commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, or covet.
But it's elaborated upon here.
Yeah, and so he elaborated upon it. There's a whole book written about what, or a whole big long article written about what was on it. Was it on both sides? Was it on one side? And the speculation is endless. So what you're wondering about, a lot of people did. But it's not the whole book of Deuteronomy on it.
When you number in Hebrew, does the number go on the right-hand side and then you write backwards? Or does the number go on the left-hand side and then you write backwards?
Well, they probably would have numbered it on the left-hand side with Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Daleth, Hey, Vav, Zayin, or up to 10, because they use numbers for counting.
And then
Or, I mean letters for counting.
From the right, and then go back from the right to the left.
You would start here and go this way.
But your number would be on the left-hand side.
Number would be on the right-hand side.
Oh, okay, okay.
It'd be on the right-hand side, so you'd start here, Aleph, and then Lo, and then each one with Lo, or Zakar, or Shamar, or whatever. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean they had the numbers on the numbering. Okay, you're assuming that they would have put the numbers there like we do for problem number 13. Might have just had the words there. And was it on one side, was it on both sides? How big was the tablet? We've carried some stones around, and they're heavy. You know, so usually they show something about yay big under each arm. Probably not. The idea would have probably been that they would have been put somewhere so people who would go by would read it.
So my assumption is if it was a public document, it would only be on one side. Now, there are a lot of Akkadian documents, Babylonian documents, where they're written on both sides, but that's a private tablet, not something that would have been put up that people would have read.
Is it etched in stone? Did the people at that time know how to etch in stone, or is that only God who knew that at that time? They knew how to write on stone, but not to etch in it.
I would imagine it was etched. As you get into the Iron Age already, if you use a soft stone like limestone, you can etch in it.
Okay.
But they probably, more normally, the Moabite stone, for example, was plastered and then painted on. And so they would use something like carbon and oil, olive oil and carbon. You know, if you dry it out enough, it forms a paste, and then you could draw with it that way. But they have some more of their writing would have been on pottery. Would have been the more standard kind of thing that you'd find writing, and then usually with ink on pottery. Of course, they would rarely incise that. But there is a passage in Habakkuk that says that he may run who reads it. The just shall live by faith. And that talks about something, I think, etched on, and Isaiah talks about or Jeremiah, I think, with sin is etched on your hearts with an iron pen, iron stylus. Yeah.
You do have a limit for knowing how big it is because it had to fit in the ark. And so there are dimensions for the ark given. So
Yeah, and the ark would have been maybe about that, by that, by that. Okay, about 2.5 feet by, I think, maybe 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. That's just off the top of my head. So, all right, let me finish reading 5, and then I want to go back to Exodus with you. Verse 28, the Lord heard your words when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard the words of this people, which they have spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. If only they had such a mind as this to fear me and to keep all my commandments always, so that it might go well with them and with their children forever. Go and say to them, return to your tents, but you stand here by me, and I will tell you all the commandments, the statutes, and the ordinances that you shall teach them, so that they may do them in the land that I am giving them to possess. You must therefore be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn to the right or to the left. You must follow exactly the path the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live, and that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land that you are to possess. Now let's go back to Exodus 20. I'm not usually one of these guys who chases all around in the Bible, but look, let's see what we kind of get here. Have a question? Okay. I would tell you what page it is, but it's not the same page in your Bible, so it wouldn't much matter. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. In Deuteronomy it was bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Now is that you shall have no other gods before me? Same exact. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents, to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to the 1000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So, how does that one match up? Pretty close, right? And so we're not necessarily happy with it, but he does say, I am a punishing, jealous, avengeful God. I'm jealous. I don't want you sharing your love with anybody else. I don't want you going after that. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. How does that one do?
Same.
Pretty much the same. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident of your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and consecrated it. Any difference there?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Now all of a sudden the motivation is take a day off because God created the world in 7 days, versus take a day off so that your slaves have a day off.
Okay, so quite a bit different there. Then honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. This one gets expanded a little bit, and that your days may be long, that it may go well with you. Then you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Where's the difference there?
Wife,
What about it?
it's not in
Doch.
Exodus.
Yes, it is.
Where? Okay.
It starts out with, you shall not covet your
Oh,
neighbor's
okay.
house,
I
you shall
see.
not covet your neighbor's wife.
I
In
see.
Deuteronomy, it says, you shall not covet neither shall you desire your neighbor's, neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife, neither shall you desire your neighbor's house. So in Deuteronomy, the wife comes up as the most important one, versus the house over here in Exodus. Now, people are going to spin their minds and their wheels about why. Okay? I know the answer. You know the answer. So why should we go into it anymore? Right, Kathy?
Absolutely. Got that.
All right. I'm going to walk quickly through a couple things with you. We're not going to get into 29 to 34 at this point. I'll end up with my 20 seconds on Deuteronomy 32, just like I was afraid of. But I want to go in just a little bit into chapter 6. Now, this is the commandment. This is the commandment, the statutes and the ordinances that the Lord your God charged me to teach you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy, so that you and your children's children, may fear the Lord your God all the days of your life, and keep all his decrees and his commandments that I'm commanding you, so that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe them diligently, so that it may go well with you, and so that you may multiply greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And nobody knows how to translate it. Hear, O Israel, Shema. That's a singular, an imperative. Shema, hear. Shema Yisrael, Adonai. You know the word Adonai? It's the more recent version of Yahweh. Adonai Eloheinu. Eloheinu from Elohim is our God. They put the suffixes right on the word in Hebrew, makes it complicated. Adonai, the Lord, Echad, one. Now, Echad times Shalosh Arba Chamesh Sheva. So one and following. Echad. The Lord is one. The Lord is the only Lord for you. The Lord is Lord alone. Nobody knows how to translate that simple word Echad, one.
Or first.
Or first. No, I think they would have had, Rishon would be the ordinal for that, not the cardinal. So there is a separate word for first. After about number 3, I think the ordinals and the cardinals go together. But the first couple of them, couple or 3 are separate. So here we have the reason why most Jewish people say they can't be Christian.
Oh, because the Lord's one.
Lord is one.
One.
So how can you have 3 persons in one God? Okay, this is the text that does in more discussion about it than anything else. Okay, now, God is one. Okay, one God. Operating in 3 very different ways, and we use the word persona for that. You know the Greek word for persona? Reverend, you know this one?
Ooh.
No? Hypocrite. The word for hypocrite. The hypocrite is the wax mask that Sarah would know this
The
one.
actors use.
That the actors would use when they were in plays. We haven't been to Chanhassen for a while, but When you go to Chanhassen, you have some major characters, and then you have minor characters who play different roles in each scene. You know, so they have Western dress on for one scene, and you know, maybe they have scuba diving gear on for another scene. And so the ancient actors, it would all be male, and they would wear this mask. That's the Greek word for it. The Latin word for it is persona. So when the church tried to figure out how do we talk about one God, it's the same one behind it, but acting in different ways. If you can figure out the Trinity, then you're better than any human on earth. Nobody understands it. So we can talk about it. I can remember hearing people say, well, it's sort of like carbon. It can be coal or diamond or
Dust.
well, just, you know, a pencil lead or something like that, or coal or a diamond. The sun gives off light and heat and energy. There are various ways that people have talked about such things where something looks very different. So if you're going to look at a diamond, you probably are not going to say, oh, what a nice piece of coal. In fact, you probably wonder, is that really the same thing, just under that much pressure? And so things that appear different, I think it was Jonathan Marxhausen and his wife did the thing on the apple with the skin and the meat of it and the core, or the seeds, you know, as another way to talk about this that's been used quite a bit in our church body. So there are various ways that you can kind of get at it, but never really, to be able to understand really what the depth of this is. But if God was the triune God from all eternity, he hasn't changed. It's just that over time there were things that God did to express that love that he has for us. So he's always been Trinity. The economic Trinity, and what's the other one?
The, golly!
That's not it.
It's a word for active. It's the economic Trinity.
The economic is the active one.
Yeah.
The passive or the,
This is so funny.
I wouldn't ask him if I could remember. There's another word too. We'll think of it as soon as the tape goes off. Oh boy, now I'm going to be
Google.
that fast. The economic Trinity and the economy is the word actually for what happens under the laws of the house. Like oikos and nomos.
Imminent Trinity.
The immanent Trinity. The immanent Trinity, which is God within himself. So from all eternity, the Son has been being begotten of the Father, and the Spirit has been proceeding. Okay? That's been going on for all eternity. And then there's a separate way that it works, where Jesus steps away from that relationship in the full sense to become human and to suffer and die and rise again. When did Jesus quit being God? When did he quit being man?
When he died on the cross.
No.
Although he stayed man.
When did he quit being man? When he was crucified? No.
He hasn't?
Well, I got to
Full
in
God.
heaven, or he hasn't. The Athanasian Creed says that God took humanity into himself, and that a human being is in charge of the universe. Jesus Christ, for the sake of his body, the church.
He's full God and full man.
Full God and full man for all eternity. That never changes. So that, and the simple answer was he was God so that he could save all of us, and man so that he could save us. That's the early church's answer. He had to be both in order to bring that about. I'm sure he could have done another way if he chose. That's the way God chose to do it. But anyway, just to reiterate in verse 4 as we come to a conclusion here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I'm commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're away. When you lie down, when you rise, bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead. And write them on the doorposts of your heart, or your house, and on your gates. Which is why you will see Orthodox Jewish people wrap the box, I guess it'd have to be the right arm and on the forehead. Okay, where they wrap certain biblical texts. And so they wear them on their forehead.
Like
Okay.
you're gonna have osmosis.
Huh?
Like
And
it's
then maybe,
osmosis.
yeah, maybe have osmosis then. I think he simply meant in your head and heart and in your actions. But you see, this is when you can very literally take something and say, well, he really meant that. And so now they got the little box and everything, and the mezuzah which you put on the doorpost by your house to mark it there. To remember that this is something that goes on in all of your life, not just the time that you were together with others.
And the tassels on their shawls.
And the tassels, those are different again. That's just to remember that they're saved and redeemed. Yep. So we'll pick it up with a little bit at 6 and dance our way through. I'm not going to take all of these chapters in all sorts of detail, but I do want to at least call attention to them along the way, because some of them are about worship, some of them are about food laws, some of them are about laws of taking care of property, some kinds of things of impurities and things like that. So a lot of it we've seen before, one way or another, but they're reiterated much more with a social kind of thing, like so that your slaves have a day of rest as well, and all of what goes on with there. So thank you very much.
See, there's
Yes.